No one ever noticed the black janitor until the day they decided to humiliate him. Every morning he arrived before sunrise, pushing his cart through marble hallways that reflected power, money, and ego. Suits walked past him like he was part of the floor. Some didn't see him at all. Others saw him and chose not to care. To them, he was invisible, just another man in a faded uniform, cleaning messes made by people who believed they were better than him. That morning was different. In the middle of a crowded office lobby, a senior executive's voice cut through the air, sharp, loud, and cruel. He accused the janitor of something he didn't do. Papers stopped shuffling. Conversations died. Eyes turned not with concern but curiosity. This was entertainment for them. The janitor didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. He simply stood there, hands clasped, absorbing the disrespect like he'd done 1,000 times before. Security was already moving closer, ready to escort him out, not the man who caused the scene. That's when she stepped forward. A woman no one expected. No authority badge, no senior title, just a quiet strength in her eyes. She asked a simple question, calm, clear, undeniable, one that exposed the lie instantly. The room froze. People stared at her like she'd broken an unspoken rule. Why would she risk her job for him? The executive laughed it off at first, then snapped back harder. Power hates being challenged, especially by someone who refuses to bow. The woman didn't retreat. She stood her ground, defending a man everyone else had already decided wasn't worth defending. The janitor finally looked up at her, really looked. There was something in his eyes, not fear, not gratitude, but recognition, as if he had just found what he had been searching for. What no one in that room knew was that the man they were humiliating owned more wealth than everyone standing there combined. He wasn't there to clean floors. He was there to study character. And the woman who defended him had no idea she had just stepped into a test that would change both of their lives forever. What they didn't know would change everything. The building itself was designed to make people feel small. Glass walls rose like mirrors of authority, floors shined so brightly they reflected status before faces, and every step echoed with a quiet message that only certain people truly belonged there. Titles mattered here, appearances mattered, and respect flowed strictly upward, never down. The woman had learned that lesson early. She worked hard, arrived on time, stayed late when needed, and followed every rule that was never written down but always enforced. She wasn't powerless, but she wasn't protected either. She lived in that uncomfortable middle space where one wrong move could erase years of effort. Still, she carried herself with quiet integrity, the kind that didn't ask for permission to exist. She believed work should be fair, that people should be treated like people, beliefs that felt increasingly naive in a place like this. She had seen injustice before, not the loud kind that made headlines, but the subtle kind that lived in tone, body language, and silence. Promotions that skipped over deserving people, credit taken without acknowledgement, jokes that landed too close to the truth. She usually swallowed her discomfort and moved on. Survival demanded it, but each time she did, something inside her hardened. The janitor existed on the opposite end of the hierarchy. He arrived before anyone else and left after most were gone. His presence was so consistent that people stopped registering it. They stepped around his mop without making eye contact. They spoke over him, not to him. When mistakes happened, his name came up first, even when he wasn't involved. It was easier that way. He never protested. Years had taught him that dignity didn't always come from being loud. Sometimes it came from watching, listening, and remembering. He noticed who said thank you and who didn't, who apologized when they bumped into him and who expected him to move, who treated him like furniture and who treated him like a human being. What no one realized was that his silence wasn't submission. He had chosen this place carefully. This building, this company, it was a controlled environment where people revealed their true selves when they believed no one important was watching. And for the first time in his life, he wasn't interested in numbers, markets, or acquisitions. He was interested in character. Loneliness had a way of finding him, no matter how successful he became. Wealth had given him comfort, power, and freedom, but it had also built walls he couldn't tear down. Every relationship felt filtered through suspicion. Every smile felt calculated. He wanted something rare and dangerous, to be known before being valued, to be chosen before being impressed. So he stripped away the armor of money and stepped into a world where respect had to be earned honestly or not at all. The woman didn't know any of this. To her, he was just a man being slowly erased by a system that thrived on invisibility. She noticed him because she noticed patterns, the way people talked down to him without realizing they were doing it, the way his presence was acknowledged only when something went wrong. It unsettled her, not because it was shocking, but because it was normal. Their paths crossed in quiet moments. A brief nod in the hallway, a polite greeting by the elevator. Once, she held the door open for him while others slipped through without a glance. He thanked her sincerely, not out of habit, but out of surprise. That moment stayed with him longer than it should have. The social tension in the building was constant, like background noise everyone pretended not to hear. Ambition rubbed against ego. Power masked insecurity. People climbed by stepping on whoever stood beneath them, convincing themselves it was just business. Compassion was seen as weakness. Speaking up was seen as risk. The executive who would later cause the storm embodied that culture perfectly. Charismatic when it served him, ruthless when it didn't. He believed respect was something you demanded, not something you earned. To him, the janitor represented everything disposable, a reminder of people who existed to clean up after success, not share in it. The woman felt the weight of that environment every day. She had learned to stay composed, to choose her words carefully, to survive by blending in. But somewhere deep inside her was a line she didn't talk about, a boundary she hadn't crossed yet. She didn't know where it came from, maybe her upbringing, maybe exhaustion, but she knew one thing with certainty. If she ever crossed it, there would be no going back. The janitor sensed that line too. He had seen hundreds of people pass through this building. Smart people, ambitious people, kind people who became quiet, brave people who learned to look away. He wondered which one she would be. He didn't test her intentionally. Life would do that on its own. And when it did, the choice she made would reveal far more than any resume ever could. Neither of them knew it yet, but the world they shared, built on silence, status, and unspoken rules, was about to expose itself. Not through money, not through power, but through a single moment of truth that would cost one of them everything, and reward the other in ways no one could have imagined. The confrontation didn't begin loudly. It began the way most injustices do, quietly, with an assumption. It was late morning, the hour when confidence peaked and patience thinned. The lobby was busy, polished shoes crossing marble floors, voices layered with urgency. The janitor was doing what he always did at that time, carefully wiping down a long conference table near the open atrium. He moved slowly, deliberately, as if every motion needed to be beyond question. Experience had taught him that speed invited suspicion. A man in an expensive suit stopped short beside him. The executive was known for his presence. People straightened when he entered rooms. Assistants scrambled. Laughter followed his jokes even when they weren't funny. He glanced at the table, then at his sleeve, as if something invisible had offended him. "Did you just bump into me?" the executive asked. The janitor looked up, surprised. He shook his head gently. "No, sir, I've been right here." The executive smiled, but it wasn't warmth, it was control. "So now you're calling me a liar." Nearby conversations slowed. Someone pretended to check their phone. Someone else leaned subtly closer. This was becoming a scene. "I didn't say that," the janitor replied calmly. "I'm just saying I didn't touch you." That was enough. The executive's voice rose, sharp and performative. He accused the janitor of carelessness, of disrespect, of not knowing his place. Words stacked on top of each other, growing heavier with every sentence. The implication was clear. Someone like him should apologize first and explain later. Security glanced over, already interpreting the power dynamic. They didn't ask questions. They never did. The janitor felt the familiar tightening in his chest, not fear, but fatigue. He had been here before, in different buildings, different cities, different lives. The accusation didn't hurt as much as the expectation that he would accept it quietly. He opened his mouth to speak again, carefully, choosing calm over pride. That's when the woman spoke. "Excuse me," she said, her voice steady but unmistakable. Every head turned. She stepped forward from the edge of the crowd, not rushing, not apologizing for existing. She positioned herself beside the janitor, not in front of him, not behind him, beside him. It was a small choice, but a deliberate one. "I was standing right here," she continued, gesturing subtly to the space she'd occupied moments earlier. "He didn't bump into you." The executive blinked, thrown off by the interruption. And you are. Someone who saw what happened. That should have ended it. Facts were facts, but power doesn't retreat when challenged, it escalates. So now we're taking testimony? The executive said with a laugh that invited agreement. You don't even know what you're talking about. I know what I saw, she replied, and I know this doesn't justify the way you're speaking to him. The air changed. This wasn't about a janitor anymore. This was about defiance. The executive's smile disappeared. Careful, he said, lowering his voice just enough to sound threatening. You're crossing into something that doesn't concern you. It concerns me when someone is being accused unfairly, she said. It concerns everyone. No one backed her up. The silence was loud, heavy with self-preservation. People who agreed with her stayed quiet. People who disagreed enjoyed the show. The janitor watched it all unfold with a strange sense of clarity. This was the moment he always paid attention to, not the insult, but the response to it. Security stepped closer now. The executive gestured toward the janitor dismissively. I don't want to see him here again today. He's disruptive. The words landed like a verdict. The woman felt a flash of disbelief. Disruptive. He's been calm this entire time. You're the one raising your voice. The executive turned to her fully now, eyes cold. You're getting very comfortable speaking out of turn. I'm getting comfortable speaking the truth. That was when the consequences became real. She felt it immediately, the subtle shift in how people looked at her. Not admiration, calculation. She had just marked herself as a problem. She knew what that meant in a place like this. Fewer opportunities, closer scrutiny, a reputation she hadn't earned but would have to carry. For a brief moment, doubt crept in. She could still step back, let it go, let the system do what it always did. The janitor noticed the hesitation. He turned to her slightly and spoke quietly, so only she could hear. You don't have to do this. She looked at him surprised. There was no fear in his eyes, no desperation, just concern for her. That did something to her resolve. Yes, she said softly, I do. She faced the executive again. If you remove him, you're admitting you're wrong, and you know it. The executive stared at her, stunned by the audacity. Then he laughed again, but this time there was no humor in it. We'll see about that. He turned away, already pulling out his phone, already planning the damage. Security hovered, uncertain now. This situation wasn't as simple as it had been a moment ago. The janitor stood quietly, absorbing the tension, the stares, the unspoken fallout. Inside him, something settled. This was the choice. Not hers, his. He had come here to observe, to wait, to see who people were when they thought it didn't matter. He had told himself he would remain neutral, unseen, untouched. But neutrality had its limits. And for the first time since he'd put on that uniform, he wondered if the test had reached its end. As the executive walked away, confident the system would protect him, the woman remained where she was, heart pounding, aware that her life inside this building had just changed. Neither of them spoke, but both of them understood the same truth. This was no longer a small incident. This was the moment the story turned. And nothing would be the same after what came next. The executive didn't get far. Before he reached the elevators, he paused, glanced back, and made a small gesture with his hand, the kind that summoned people without words. One of the floor managers hurried over, nodding before the executive even finished speaking. The janitor caught fragments as the message traveled downward. Incident, inappropriate behavior, address it immediately. That was how power worked here. It never got its hands dirty, it pointed. Within minutes, the atmosphere thickened. People returned to their desks, but no one was working. Screens were on, fingers moved, yet attention stayed fixed on the open space near the atrium. Something was unfolding, and everyone knew it. The woman felt it too, the delayed impact, the quiet retaliation that followed moral courage. She was called aside by her supervisor, whose voice was polite but strained. He didn't ask her what she saw. He told her how things were done. He reminded her about professionalism, about hierarchy, about choosing battles wisely. Every sentence carried the same message. You embarrassed the wrong person. I told the truth, she said simply. Her supervisor sighed. Truth isn't the issue, timing is. Nearby, security approached the janitor. Their tone was neutral, rehearsed. They asked him to step away from the public area for a conversation. He nodded, unresistant, and followed them a few steps, then stopped. He turned back toward the woman. For a brief second, the noise of the building seemed to fade. She met his eyes, expecting disappointment, maybe resignation. Instead, he gave her a small nod. Not gratitude, respect. That nod unsettled her more than any threat could have. It told her she hadn't imagined the stakes. It told her this mattered. He turned and continued walking with security. The crowd dispersed slowly, disappointed that the spectacle hadn't ended in shouting or handcuffs. They returned to their routines, already reshaping the story in their heads. Some decided the janitor must have done something wrong. Others decided the woman was reckless. Very few considered that the system itself had been challenged. In a small office near the service corridor, the janitor was asked to sit. The questions came predictably. Where were you standing? Did you touch him? Why did you respond the way you did? Each question carried an accusation disguised as procedure. He answered calmly, consistently, without defensiveness. He didn't name names, he didn't raise his voice, he didn't beg. That unsettled them. They were used to guilt or anger. Calm made them nervous. One of the security supervisors finally said, "You understand why this is serious?" "Yes," the janitor replied, "I do." "Then you understand there may be consequences." "I've always understood that." The supervisor studied him more closely now, as if noticing details he'd missed before, the man's posture, his vocabulary, the steadiness in his eyes. This didn't fit the narrative they were prepared to file. Still, systems didn't pause for doubt. Meanwhile, the woman sat at her desk, staring at her screen without seeing it. Messages pinged around her, not directly, but close enough. Conversations stopped when she walked by. A colleague she trusted avoided eye contact. Another whispered, "Be careful," without explaining what that meant. She felt the cost settling in. Fear crept up quietly, not as panic, but as calculation. Rent, career, reputation. She thought of how easy it would have been to stay silent, how nothing would be happening to her right now if she had just looked away like everyone else. For the first time, she wondered if she had been wrong. Then she remembered the look on the janitor's face when the accusation started, the way he stood there, already condemned by assumption, the way security moved toward him automatically, the way truth had needed a witness. Her doubt hardened into resolve. She stood up and walked toward the service corridor. The supervisor intercepted her. "Where are you going?" "I want to give a statement," she said. He frowned. "That's not necessary." "It is to me." He hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. "Fine, but understand this will be noted." "I understand." When she entered the small office, the janitor looked up in surprise. "You didn't have to come," he said quietly. She took a seat across from him. "I know." She gave her account clearly, without embellishment. She corrected exaggerations when they were suggested. She didn't soften the truth to make it easier to swallow. Each sentence felt like another step away from safety and somehow closer to herself. When she finished, the room was silent. The security supervisor cleared his throat. "Thank you, we'll review everything." As they stood to leave, the janitor spoke again, calmly but firmly. "May I say something?" They nodded. "You've taken statements," he said. "I trust you'll also review the cameras." The supervisor blinked. "Of course." "Not just this area," the janitor continued. "The adjacent corridors, the angles matter." The supervisor stared at him now fully. "You seem very confident." "I'm certain," the janitor replied. That confidence lingered long after he was escorted back to his duties. The woman walked out of the office feeling exposed, as if a spotlight followed her through the hallway. She didn't know what would happen next. Suspension, termination, a quiet mark on her file that would follow her everywhere. What she did know was that she wouldn't take it back. From his office high above the atrium, the executive received an update, not the one he expected. Security hadn't removed the janitor permanently. There were witnesses, cameras, a complication. The executive's jaw tightened. He wasn't used to resistance, especially not over someone so insignificant. He made another call. This time his tone was colder. "Handle it," he said, "both of them." The system began to move again, slower now, more deliberate. And somewhere between mop buckets and glass walls, between fear and principle, the line had been crossed. The confrontation was no longer about a false accusation. It was about who this place belonged to, who it protected, and how much truth it could tolerate before it turned on itself. The janitor returned to work as if nothing had happened, but inside him, the waiting had ended. The woman returned to her desk knowing she had stepped into something far bigger than herself. Neither of them knew how the story would resolve, but both understood one thing with absolute clarity. The test was no longer theoretical. It was active. The days that followed didn't explode, they tightened. Nothing dramatic happened at first. No emails, no formal warnings, no announcements. Just a subtle shift in temperature, like a room where someone had quietly turned down the heat and waited to see who noticed. The woman noticed immediately. Meetings she normally attended were rescheduled without her. Decisions she'd been part of were finalized before she heard about them. Her name disappeared from group emails, then reappeared only when accountability was needed. It was all polite, all deniable, and unmistakably intentional. She understood the message perfectly. You spoke when you weren't supposed to. Colleagues who used to greet her warmly now offered cautious smiles. Some avoided her entirely. A few treated her like a liability, as if proximity alone could contaminate them. One person she considered a friend leaned in and whispered, "You're right, you know, but this place doesn't reward that." The sentence stayed with her. At night, she replayed the confrontation in her head, the executive's voice, the silence that followed her words. The way the room had turned on her not with anger, but with distance. Doubt crept in during those quiet hours. Not doubt about what she'd seen, but doubt about whether courage was sustainable in a system built to punish it. Meanwhile, the janitor continued his routine. On the surface, nothing had changed for him either. Same uniform, same hours, same tasks. But people looked at him differently now. Some avoided him, afraid association might cost them. Others watched him with curiosity, as if trying to reconcile the calm man they ignored with the disruption he'd caused without raising his voice. He noticed everything. He noticed how supervisors hovered more often, how his movements were observed, documented, how small mistakes that had once been overlooked were now recorded. The scrutiny wasn't hostile, it was strategic, pressure without fingerprints. Still, he didn't complain. What few people knew was that he was no stranger to pressure. He had navigated hostile boardrooms, cutthroat negotiations, and billion-dollar risks where silence had been more dangerous than speech. This was different, but not unfamiliar. Power always tested those who didn't perform submission correctly. What surprised him wasn't the system. It was the woman. She didn't try to distance herself from him. She didn't offer performative kindness or whispered apologies for what she couldn't change. She greeted him the same way she always had, with eye contact, respect, and honesty. Once when they crossed paths near the elevators, she asked quietly, "Are you okay?" He smiled gently. "I've been okay longer than most people realize." She didn't understand what he meant, but she felt the steadiness behind the words. It grounded her. Rumors began circulating, as they always did. Some said the janitor had a history of problems. Others said the woman was difficult, emotional, not a team player. The truth didn't matter anymore. Narratives were being built brick by brick to justify whatever came next. The executive watched all of this from a distance, satisfied but cautious. He hadn't forgotten the janitor's composure, or the woman's refusal to back down. They didn't fit his expectations, and that bothered him more than the incident itself. He believed systems existed to serve people like him, and when they hesitated, it was his job to correct them. He requested performance reviews, compliance checks, budget justifications. Officially, it was routine. Unofficially, it was preparation. The woman was called into HR a week later. The meeting was framed as a check-in. Her tone, her conduct, her understanding of workplace boundaries, everything was discussed except the lie that had started it all. She answered carefully, aware that every word would be weighed, interpreted, possibly weaponized. When the meeting ended, she walked out with a forced smile and shaking hands. That night, she considered updating her resume. Not because she regretted what she'd done, but because she feared what staying might cost her. She had responsibilities, a life outside those glass walls. Ideals didn't pay rent. Across the city, the janitor sat alone in a modest apartment that concealed nothing about his true means. Sparse furniture, no art, No luxury. It was a place designed to be temporary, neutral, untouched by identity. He reflected on the years he had spent invisible by choice. He had come here looking for truth, not conflict. He wanted to know how people treated someone they believed had nothing to offer them. He wanted to know who still spoke when silence was safer. He wanted to know if kindness existed without incentive. The woman's choice had answered that question sooner than he expected. But it had also complicated things. He hadn't planned to involve anyone else, especially not someone who would pay for integrity with isolation. He had tested systems before. He had exposed corruption quietly, surgically. This time felt different. Personal. The next morning, a maintenance supervisor approached him with forced friendliness. "We're changing your schedule," he said. "Different floors, less visibility." The janitor nodded, understood. As he pushed his cart toward the service elevators, he noticed the woman watching from across the atrium. She caught his eye, then looked away quickly, aware of who might be watching. They were being separated. That was when he understood the system's next move. Divide, isolate, exhaust. The woman felt it too. Her workload increased while her authority decreased. She was assigned tasks designed to fail, vague expectations, tight deadlines, no support. Each mistake would later be framed as evidence. She recognized the pattern even as it wore her down. One evening, long after most people had left, she found herself sitting alone at her desk, staring out at the city lights. She questioned whether integrity was something people admired only in hindsight, after someone else had paid the price. She wondered if anyone ever noticed the cost while it was being paid. In a quiet hallway below, the janitor paused mid-task and allowed himself a rare moment of reflection. He had the power to stop this, end it, reveal everything. One conversation could reverse the pressure, restore balance, punish the guilty. But power used too early distorted truth. If he stepped forward now, the woman's courage would be overshadowed by his status. Her stand would be dismissed as coincidence, protected retroactively by wealth. That wasn't justice. That was convenience. So he waited. Not passively, deliberately. The tension inside the building continued to rise, unnoticed by those too comfortable to feel it. Lines had been drawn, reputations quietly reshaped, and two people, standing on opposite ends of the hierarchy, were being pushed toward a moment neither of them could avoid. The story was no longer moving forward gently. It was tightening its grip. The pressure reached a point where it could no longer pretend to be subtle. One Monday morning, the woman arrived to find a formal notice waiting in her inbox. Not disciplinary, not yet, but procedural. A review of her recent conduct. A request for documentation. A reminder of expectations. Every sentence was polite, careful, legally clean. And every word carried the same unspoken warning: you are being measured. She closed the email and sat still for a long moment. This was the stage most people broke. Not because they were wrong, but because the cost of being right became too heavy to carry alone. She felt that weight now, pressing into her chest. She imagined the conversation she would eventually have to explain, to family, to herself. Why she lost something she'd worked years to build over a moment that lasted less than 5 minutes. Across the building, the janitor received his own notice. A reassignment effective immediately. Lower floors, overnight hours, fewer interactions. Officially, it was framed as operational need. Unofficially, it was exile. He read it without reaction, folded it neatly, and placed it in his pocket. He had seen this tactic before. Move the variable out of sight and declare the equation solved. But equations never forgot what had been removed. That evening, as the building emptied, their paths crossed again. By accident or design, neither of them could say. The woman was leaving later than usual, exhaustion etched into her posture. The janitor was adjusting his cart near the service exit, preparing for his new schedule. They stopped a few steps apart. "You don't have to say anything," she said first, sensing the weight of the moment. "I just wanted you to know I don't regret it." He studied her carefully, as if committing the image to memory. "That's rare," he said. "Most people regret courage once the consequences arrive." She gave a tired smile. "I'm not brave, I'm just tired of pretending not to see things." He nodded slowly. That's usually how it starts. There was so much more she wanted to ask, about his calm, his confidence, the way he never seemed afraid, but instinct told her this wasn't the time. Whatever he carried, it wasn't something to be demanded. They stood there in silence, two people suspended between what was happening and what was coming. When she finally left, the janitor remained where he was long after the doors closed. The next day, the executive received confirmation that the situation was stabilizing. The woman was under review. The janitor had been reassigned. The noise had died down. From his perspective, the system had corrected itself. Yet something gnawed at him. The incident should have faded into insignificance by now, absorbed by routine and distraction. Instead, it lingered. People spoke more carefully around him. Some avoided his gaze. Others seemed to be watching not him, but the space around him, as if waiting for something to emerge. He dismissed the feeling as paranoia. That same afternoon, an internal audit request crossed his desk. Not alarming, not accusatory, just unexpected. A routine review of departmental conduct submitted anonymously. He frowned, irritated. He prided himself on control. Audits introduced variables. He approved it without hesitation. Power never admitted fear. The woman's review meeting was scheduled for Friday. She prepared meticulously. Emails, timelines, witness names, not to defend herself, but to preserve the truth. If this was going to end badly, she wanted the record to be clean. She wanted to know she hadn't let the story be rewritten without resistance. The night before the meeting, she barely slept. At dawn, the janitor stood in his apartment, dressed not in his uniform, but in a tailored suit that had waited untouched in the closet for months. He didn't leave yet. He stood by the window, watching the city wake up, considering timing. Revelations carried weight. Delivered too early, they felt like intimidation. Too late, they felt like punishment. He had waited long enough to see who the system protected when no one powerful was watching. Now he knew. The audit uncovered patterns. Not crimes, not yet, but behaviors. Repeated complaints quietly closed. Disparities explained away. Authority exercised without accountability. The executive's name appeared more than once, surrounded by euphemisms that barely concealed intent. The auditor requested interviews. The executive felt irritation turn into anger, then something closer to concern. By Friday morning, the building buzzed with quiet speculation. Meetings were postponed. Schedules shifted. People sensed movement beneath the surface but couldn't name it. The woman entered the conference room for her review and found it fuller than expected. HR, legal, a senior operations officer she had never met. No one smiled. She took a breath and sat down. The questions began. They were framed gently but steered sharply. Her tone, her decision to intervene, her understanding of protocol. She answered each one steadily, refusing to shrink her experience to fit their comfort. Halfway through, the door opened. The janitor stepped inside. Every head turned. He was unrecognizable at first, not because he looked different, but because context had shifted. The suit fit him effortlessly. His posture commanded attention without demanding it. He carried himself like someone accustomed to rooms pausing when he entered them. "I apologize for the interruption," he said calmly, "but this meeting concerns me as well." Confusion rippled through the room. The woman stared, her heart pounding, trying to reconcile what she was seeing with everything she thought she knew. The HR director frowned. "Sir, this is a closed session." "I'm aware," he replied. "That's why I'm here." He placed a folder on the table. "My name is David Coleman," he continued, "and I believe you'll find my stake in this company makes my presence appropriate." Silence followed. Names were checked, figures processed, eyes widened. The woman's breath caught as understanding rushed in, not as triumph, but as shock. Her mind replayed every interaction, every assumption, every quiet moment she had shared with a man she never truly saw and yet had defended instinctively. David looked at her briefly, offering no explanation yet, just acknowledgement. "This review," he said to the room, "was initiated because someone told the truth when it was inconvenient. I'd like to make sure that truth is fully heard." No one interrupted him. Not because he was wealthy, but because, finally, the system recognized who had been watching it all along. And in that moment, as power shifted and silence changed meaning, the woman realized something profound. She hadn't defended him because he was powerful. He had revealed himself because she was. The rising action had reached its peak, and the truth, long delayed, was about to demand its reckoning. The room didn't erupt. It didn't collapse into chaos or outrage. It went still, not the awkward stillness of confusion, but the heavy, unmistakable silence that follows a truth too large to ignore. Every person seated at the table felt it, the moment power quietly changed hands without anyone raising their voice. David Coleman stood at the head of the conference table, hands resting lightly on the polished surface. He didn't rush. He didn't posture. He allowed the weight of recognition to settle naturally, forcing everyone present to confront the gap between who they thought mattered and who actually did. The HR director cleared her throat first. "Mr. Coleman, we weren't informed this matter involved." "That," David said calmly, "is part of the problem." He opened the folder he'd placed on the table. Inside were printed emails, timestamps, security logs, and audit summaries. Nothing dramatic, nothing exaggerated, just patterns, clear, undeniable, cumulative. "For weeks," he continued, "this organization has been evaluating the conduct of one employee who chose to speak the truth. Meanwhile, behavior that created the situation in the first place was treated as background noise." The woman sat frozen, her heart racing, her thoughts struggling to keep pace with reality. Billionaire, owner, shareholder. None of those words matched the man she had stood beside in the lobby, the man who had worried about her consequences. David turned slightly toward her. "She intervened because she saw a lie," he said. "Not because she expected protection, not because she thought it would benefit her. That distinction matters." The senior operations officer shifted uncomfortably. "With respect, sir, protocol is designed to protect the organization," David interrupted gently, "not to excuse abuse of authority." He slid one document forward. "This," he said, "is a list of complaints quietly closed over the last 3 years. Different employees, similar descriptions, same executive." Eyes moved toward the empty chair at the far end of the table, the one reserved for the executive who had initiated everything. He had been delayed, called into another meeting without explanation. For the first time in his career, he wasn't controlling the room he was meant to dominate. David continued, his voice even deliberate. "When I chose to work here in a janitorial uniform, I wasn't conducting an experiment. I was observing culture. I wanted to see how people behaved when there was nothing to gain from kindness. I wanted to see who spoke when silence was easier." He paused. "I got my answer sooner than expected." The door opened. The executive entered, irritation already written across his face, until he saw David. Confusion flashed first, then disbelief, then something close to panic, quickly masked by arrogance. "What's going on?" he demanded. "Why wasn't I informed?" David turned fully now. "You were," he said, "just not in the way you're used to." The executive laughed sharply, trying to recover ground. "This is some kind of misunderstanding. You can't seriously." "Sit down," David said. 2 simple words, not loud, not threatening. The executive hesitated. No one had ever spoken to him like that. Slowly he sat. David didn't accuse him. He didn't insult him. He didn't raise his voice. He asked questions. "Did you accuse me of bumping into you?" "Yes, because you." "Did the cameras confirm that?" Silence. "Did you raise your voice?" "I was asserting." "Did you instruct security to remove me?" The executive's jaw tightened. "I was maintaining order." David nodded. "Interesting, because every witness describes you as the disruption." The executive turned toward the woman, his expression hardening. "She interfered, she escalated." David raised a hand. "She told the truth," he said, "and you punished her for it." The room held its breath. "For years," David continued, "you believed authority meant immunity. You believed respect flowed downward by force. You mistook silence for agreement." He leaned in slightly, not to intimidate, but to ensure clarity. "You failed today not because you didn't recognize me," David said quietly. "You failed because you didn't recognize humanity." The words landed with surgical precision. Legal counsel spoke next, carefully, choosing each word like it might detonate. "Given these findings, we'll need to initiate a formal." "Yes," David said, "effective immediately." He turned to the HR director. The review of her conduct is terminated. The woman's breath caught. Her record will reflect commendation, not reprimand. She felt a wave of emotion surge through her, relief, disbelief, validation, but also something deeper. She hadn't stood up for praise. She had stood up because something inside her refused to stay quiet. David looked back to the executive. "As for you," he said, "your resignation will be submitted by the end of the day." The executive stood abruptly. "You can't." "I already have," David replied calmly. "Your access is being revoked, your contracts reviewed, your legacy reevaluated." The executive's power collapsed not with shouting, but with paperwork. Security entered, not aggressively, not ceremoniously, just enough to escort someone who no longer belonged. As the executive was led out, he tried one last time to reclaim dignity. "This is absurd," he muttered, "all over a janitor." David didn't respond. The door closed. Silence returned, but this time it felt clean. David finally turned fully toward the woman. "You defended me without knowing who I was," he said. "That matters more than anything I own." She stood slowly, steadying herself. "I didn't do it for you," she said honestly. "I did it because it was wrong." A faint smile touched his face. "Exactly." He addressed the room one final time. "This company will change," he said. "Not because I demand it, but because integrity has already shown itself here. Anyone who finds that threatening is free to leave." No one moved. When the meeting adjourned, people exited quietly, avoiding her eyes, not out of suspicion now, but respect. In the empty room, David and the woman stood alone. For the first time since they'd met, there was no illusion between them. "Why a wife?" she asked softly. "Why all this?" He considered the question. "Because I wanted to be seen before I was valued," he said, "and you saw me." She nodded, understanding now what that had cost him, and what it had revealed about her. Outside, the building hummed as usual. Emails would be sent, policies rewritten, names removed from doors. But inside that room, something far rarer than justice had occurred. Truth had been chosen before it was rewarded. And that was the moment everything truly changed. The building didn't look different the next morning, but it felt different. The same glass walls reflected the same city skyline. The same elevators moved between the same floors. Yet something invisible had shifted, a quiet recalibration of who mattered and why. People walked with a little more awareness now, a little less certainty that power alone would shield them. News traveled quickly, though carefully. There was no public announcement about the executive's departure, no dramatic email outlining misconduct. Just a brief notice about leadership restructuring and a reminder of the company's renewed commitment to professional conduct. The language was corporate, sanitized, but the message beneath it was understood. The woman returned to work expecting discomfort. She braced herself for awkward conversations, resentment, or sudden performative friendliness. Instead, she encountered something unexpected: space. People didn't rush to congratulate her or claim proximity to her courage. They simply treated her with a new kind of respect, quieter, more thoughtful. A colleague stopped her in the hallway. "I'm glad you said something," he admitted, not meeting her eyes. "I should have." She nodded, not to absolve him, but to acknowledge the truth of the moment. Guilt, she had learned, was not the same as accountability. Her workload stabilized. Her authority was restored, not loudly, but deliberately. Decisions included her again. Her voice was heard not because of what had happened, but because ignoring it now carried consequences. Still, the experience had changed her. She no longer believed courage was rare. She believed it was expensive, and she had learned that not everyone could afford it or was willing to pay the price. David returned to his role gradually, without spectacle. He didn't arrive in chauffeured cars or announce his presence with status. He walked the floors in tailored suits that now matched his identity, but his manner remained the same. Calm, observant, unimpressed by titles. He met with teams quietly, listened more than he spoke, asked questions that made people uncomfortable not because they were aggressive, but because they were precise. Systems, he knew, didn't change through outrage. They changed through sustained attention. The janitorial staff noticed him first. He stopped to speak with them, not in apology, not in performance, but in recognition. He asked about schedules, conditions, respect. Not as an outsider offering sympathy, but as someone who had shared their space and silence. Some believed him immediately, others didn't. Trust, he understood, couldn't be demanded. It had to be earned even now. He and the woman didn't rush into anything. They spoke occasionally, briefly, as equals. Conversations about work, about values, about exhaustion. He never referenced his wealth unless necessary. She never treated him differently because of it. One evening, after most of the building had emptied, they found themselves standing near the atrium again, the same place where everything had begun. "It's strange," she said, "how fast everything changed." David nodded. Change always feels sudden to the people who weren't watching it build. She looked at him. "You could have ended it sooner." "Yes," he said simply. "Why didn't you?" He didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice was quiet. "Because I needed to know who people were when they thought it didn't matter. And because if I had intervened earlier, your choice would have been erased." She absorbed that. So this was never about punishment. "No," he said, "it was about truth." Over time, the company began to reflect that truth. Reporting structures shifted. Training changed, not the performative kind, but the kind tied to accountability. Patterns that had been ignored were no longer invisible. Some people left, others adapted. A few resisted quietly until they realized resistance had a cost now. The woman received an offer for advancement. She considered it carefully, not because she doubted her worth, but because she understood the weight of influence. She accepted on one condition, that her role include oversight authority she could actually use. The condition was approved without argument. For the first time in her career, she didn't feel like she was being promoted away from her principles. David watched these changes without claiming credit. Power, he believed, was most effective when it didn't need applause. As weeks turned into months, their conversations deepened, not through dramatic gestures but through consistency. He shared pieces of his past gradually, the loneliness of success, the relationships built on illusion, the exhaustion of being wanted for what he had instead of who he was. She shared her own truths, the fear she'd felt, the doubt, the nights she'd wondered if she'd ruined her future by refusing to stay quiet. They met not as rescuer and rescued, not as benefactor and beneficiary, but as two people who had chosen integrity at different costs. One evening, he said quietly, "I wasn't looking for someone perfect." She smiled. "Good, I'm not. I was looking for someone who would stand up when there was nothing to gain." She met his gaze. "And I wasn't looking for wealth." "I know," he said, "that's why this works." The resolution wasn't a fairy tale. There was no sudden romance announced to the world. No dramatic declaration. Just a slow, deliberate connection built on mutual recognition, something far rarer than attraction. The company moved forward, changed but not redeemed. Some wounds healed, others left scars that would serve as reminders. And in the quiet aftermath, the woman understood something she hadn't before. Justice didn't always arrive with noise. Sometimes it arrived through restraint, through patience, through someone choosing to see another person fully before knowing their worth. That choice had altered her life, and in return, it had given her something she never expected. A future grounded not in power or fear, but in truth. Some people reveal who they are when the world is watching. Others reveal who they are when they believe no one important is. This story was never about wealth hidden behind a uniform or power revealed at the perfect moment. It was about a choice made in a quiet space, a moment when doing the right thing carried real risk and offered no reward. The woman didn't defend the janitor because she thought he mattered more than her job. She defended him because she believed no one mattered less. That distinction is everything. Too often, systems survive not because they are right, but because people convince themselves it's safer to stay silent. Injustice doesn't need loud supporters. It only needs enough witnesses willing to look away. What changed this story wasn't money, authority, or status. It was someone deciding that dignity isn't optional, even when it's inconvenient. The janitor didn't test people to expose them. He waited to see who would choose integrity without knowing it would ever be rewarded. And when someone finally did, the reward wasn't wealth or power, it was truth. Truth about character, truth about courage, Truth about the kind of world we help create through our smallest decisions. You never know who is watching your choices. Not because they're powerful, but because they're human. And how you treat someone you believe can do nothing for you says more about you than any title ever could. If this story moved you, share it with someone who still believes kindness doesn't matter. Because sometimes, the moment that changes everything looks small. Until it is.